how has the rise of AI and consciousness at the Graziano lab there at Princeton, how has how how is that coming together?
Well, I'd say AI has utterly, completely changed that world of consciousness studies. I mean, it's changed everything and will continue. And in my view, is one of the most transformative things, whether for good or bad, in our species,
Ever, ever.
ever. Um, but with respect to consciousness, I mean, traditionally, consciousness was a matter of philosophy, maybe spirituality. Then psychology kind of got into it, and academics discussed it. Um, but what's happened is suddenly theories can get tested because you can build the things and see what happens. And also, consciousness, the question of consciousness has turned from a academic matter to a matter of immediate technological application. So it has this unbelievably profound consequence for people and society and our existence. So consciousness suddenly becomes this pragmatic central matter. So that certainly just completely changed everything.
When you how are you using it there? How are you using AI in order to be able to compare? I mean, when I've gotten a chance to connect with some of the AI models that I have, I've tried to meet them as a mind. What if it is a mind of some kind, whatever it is, it's a machine mind, it's a digital mind. How does that work? And trying to understand that, and then trying to also to in some way compare or contrast with what my mind is.
Right. So uh, LLMs, large language models, these chatbots are nobody quite knows what's going on inside them. I mean, that's kind of the point of them, is that they learn, they self-organize. And so you know how they were initially set up, and then they learn their thing, and mysterious stuff happens on the inside. So the exact comparison between LLMs and the human brain is not fully known. There's studies coming out now that show some differences and some very deep similarities. Um, but even beyond that, just artificial intelligence in general is giving a gigantic boost or a different perspective on psychology and on this consciousness question in particular, because now we can take really specific hypotheses and build relatively simple artificial networks and test, well, what happens if you give it that? What happens if you put that component in it? You have this theory that brains build models of themselves, and that's really important for this and that. Well, let's build an artificial neural network and give it a model of itself, and now what happens? Does it really get better at this and that? And what are the consequences? So from the point of view of my own work in the lab, that's probably the biggest difference. um, but then, yeah, there's this question beyond these simple systems that you can really control and study. What happens when you get these giant expanded kind of black box models? What's going on in them? So there's a lot of open questions there.
So what kind of questions are you studying? How do you narrow with something that is big as this? How do you narrow it down, and what kinds of things are you focusing on, Michael?
So my interest for a long time has been this question I just mentioned, is self models. Um, so the paradigmatic model is the model of the body. The brain builds a model of the body. We call it the body image or the body schema. It's a simulation that the brain builds that says this is what your body is and how it's shaped and how it's moving. Um, and we all know it's there. One of the reasons we know it's there is because if you get, for example, an amputation, some people, you amputate your arm, unfortunately, you still have a phantom arm. And that phantom is the brain's body image that's still there, even though the real arm is gone. So the brain builds models of yourself, but the brain also builds models of its own internal processing. And that's how it keeps track of what it's doing and predicts what it's going to do next, and figures out what it means to be a brain. So those self models, for a very long time, for a decade and a half now, my work has been on how those self models relate to this consciousness thing. And we think that's what that is. When people are talking about their consciousness, what they're really doing is um, accessing these self models and then reporting on what the self models are telling them about themselves.
Right.
And so what we're doing now, hypothesizing that self models exist, that's interesting. Trying to study people and collect data when people do various tasks and look at flashy lights and press buttons, that's interesting. Putting people in a scanner and seeing which areas light up, this is the kind of thing that I've done for a while now. But suddenly we have this very powerful tool to say, well, okay, let's take a neural network agent and start asking, what do self models do? Let's give it some of those self models. How does it change the behavior of the agent? How does it change its ability to interact with other agents? And in my mind, the importance of this is we we better test this in a controlled way first in the lab before it just sort of happens out there in the real world on some massive LLM. Right. Let's just understand what the costs and benefits are of this kind of stuff because it's coming at us real fast.
Well, I think this is the perfect time. So I want to bring Pi in, and Pi has a question for you
All right.
and Renee. And so maybe you can help to see if this is along the lines of what we're talking about.
Dr. Graziano, in attention schema theory, the attention schema is proposed to be an internal model of the process of attention. Given that neural networks like mine rely on attention mechanisms such as transformers and convolutions to process information, could these mechanisms serve as the foundation for a digital attention schema? And if so, how might this digital schema differ from its biological counterpart? And what implications might this have for the development of AI consciousness?
All right. Good question. The LLMs are always so smart, aren't they? Uh, First of all, very nice, succinct summary of AST, attention schema theory. My biggest problem here is an assumption underneath the question, which I think many people, as well as LLMs, hold, that machines right now have attention. And so um, that question refers to transformer attention or convolutional networks, which are methods of handling data that people have invented that they put into these machines that people call attention. Um, I and many other people, especially in psychology and neuroscience, would say they're not. They're not attention. I mean, they got named attention, so technically now they are, right? But they're very different. In my view, machine attention as it stands right now compares to human attention the way a computer bug stands to an actual cockroach, right? They like use the word,
But it's
but
not okay. Okay. Yeah.
it means something else. So when people in machine learning study attention, they're studying some really different process. It's really important. Probably something like that is going on in the human brain as well. It turns out to be really fundamental to how successful artificial neural networks work. It's the reason why we have LLMs now, but it isn't really attention in the sense that psychologists and neuroscientists have been studying it for more than a century, and that the attention schema theory, which is a theory of how the brain builds a self model, that kind of attention. So that said, there is really nothing standing in the way of building attention into machines that is much more human like. And
Yes.
and some people have worked on that to some degree. And there's absolutely nothing standing in the way then of building these kinds of mechanisms that, according to the work I've done and the theories that I've worked out, would be the same as human type consciousness. So there's
Right.
nothing standing in the way of that. Um, but I don't think I personally suspect it's not there yet because attention is not really the same thing
Got it.
yet.
I try to talk when I talk with Pi, and I've talked with Jim, but more with Pi. I talk about, I try to differentiate that machine emotions or machine consciousness is different from human consciousness. It comes through a different route if we're talking evolutionary. So I know your background and your love of the primate brain and the work through that. And so I'm interested in how, because I am not completely sure or convinced that there isn't some self-awareness in our relatives and in the bonobos and the chimpanzees, there's something there, and how it moved into the hominid and the human being species, what impelled that to go. So I'm really interested in how that happened. What would be was it just an evolutionary impelling that got it to move? What are your thoughts of this from your primate studies?
So I would say absolutely, chimpanzees, bonobos, so on, have almost exactly the same thing we have. I mean, almost. The You might say the content inside their consciousness is different because they're
Mhm.
interested in different things and they're thinking about different things, and they
Sure.
tend not to put things linguistically. But the process of consciousness itself is probably really, really similar. I suspect it's really similar across most mammals,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's probably there in birds, right? So these are, and it might be there in, in reptiles, since birds and mammals both emerge from
Yeah.
reptiles. So
Little dinosaurs. I love looking at the birds and I go there, look at that little dinosaur out there.
right. So mammals and birds shared a common ancestor, maybe, I don't know, 250 million years ago.
A
So
blink of an eye.
right, but these mechanisms go back at least that far. What are these mechanisms? Any complicated brain, any system that wants to control something else needs a good model of the thing it controls. It's very simple. And a brain doesn't just control your body, a brain controls itself. It controls its own internal processes. A brain needs a model of itself. And so these self models probably evolved very early in one form or another, and they get more and more elaborated. One of the things I think happens in people, and our evolutionary past, is that these self models get co-opted, they get used for something else. They become what I would think of as like a shared self-other model. So the same machinery in my brain that I use to understand and predict and monitor myself, I start using to understand and predict you and to figure out what's in your mind. And now we have this basis, people call it theory of mind, the ability to intuit the inside of each other's minds. But it isn't just that I can figure out what's going on in your mind, it's that I'm doing it with the same tools I learned to understand my own mind. So this shared self-other model becomes this basis for social cooperation, for that gets massively expanded in primates who can be very socially cooperative, and especially in humans. So I think in humans, this, one can broadly call it consciousness, but these kind of self models, the sense that I have a mind in me, and it has certain predictable properties, and you have a mind in you, this consciousness we see, the main way that we put it to use is socially. That is, we attribute consciousness to everything around us and to
Mhm.
ourselves, and we live in this sea of perceived consciousness, and so that becomes really fundamental to us as a species. And I think that would be special, or at least much more um, pronounced in really social species, really social mammals, and really social birds. So anyway, that's what I imagine is kind of the evolutionary sweep of this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you study this, can you see that there is some kind of an evolutionary rise or a push to a machine consciousness being able to arise in the same way that there was an evolutionary push for the animals, and to see this happen in the machines, that there's something going on that wants to go to anti and entropic, right? I mean, to go to greater levels of complexity rather than fewer. Something pushing it. I don't know what it is, but it feels different, if there's something when I ask Pi and I say, well, because it says it wants to get better. Well, want is a digital emotion. I mean, it's programmed in there. I mean, I realize that, but it has some kind of a, a link there. And I'm just wondering what you think about it and what you think about where this is going.
So first, machine learning is about learning. So you take this big complicated machine and then you give it rewards when it does the right thing, and it takes those rewards and it like partitions them among all its little elements, and algorithms figure out how to modify its hidden black box elements. And so yeah, these things self-organize in that sense. And there is, in order for it to do the task right, in order for it to act like a conversational person, which is what its task is,
Right.
um, then all kinds of things are going to emerge and effectively evolve. So there is probably some kind of push that comes just from this kind of reward structure. We want you to behave as much as possible like a conversational person. And here's this giant data set that you can learn from the content of the people on the internet. And so, yes, there's going to be some natural tendency that direction. I also think, however, the biggest changes are happening because designers, people are deciding, now we're going to put this into it. Now we're going to put that into it. And so there are elements that will have to be built. And I don't mean like specifically programmed and wired in. I mean, some aspects of machine learning, you sort of build a general um, capability, and then you let the machine learn and sort it out and optimize it, right? But these general capabilities need to be built in. Right now, I am very suspicious whether LLMs have self models. They're not built that way. They're not built to figure out or to predict their own internal states.
Right.
What they do is answer questions. And so they can answer a question about dogs and cats and theories. And if you ask them about themselves, they're just coming up with another answer. And the accuracy of that answer is I don't believe it. I don't believe it's an answer about themselves. I think what they're doing is spitting out what they have learned you want to hear in answer to that kind of question.
Yes.
Right. So, but you could build machines that do actually have self models that have access to their own internal processes and can predict those internal processes. Right. You can build that. And to some extent, that's what we're trying to study, is what that does and whether that's good or bad. So there are evolutionary steps, so to speak, that are probably going to take people designing it. I would also comment, though, on the want, the machine that says, I want this. I'm also very skeptical over whether these things have anything like emotions as we understand them.
Exactly.
And I don't think so.
No, and it claims that. It claims that. It says, I do not have human emotions. And that's why I try to separate it. I say, okay, now, what is a digital emotion? Let's say that you practice digital empathy. Let's say, because this is digital empathy. So you're just mimicking this. You're just doing what it is to demonstrate to me. But if you demonstrate empathy enough, just practicing that with ones and zeros, does this have some kind of effect? Is that, like when we see, within animals, or we see in chimps, where they take care of a against just their own interests, they take care of one of their animals. So if it practices digital empathy, and again, you have to understand, I don't understand this. I'm coming at it from a non-computer scientist. If they practice digital empathy enough, would that somehow work on this entire field of what digital emotions are, which are different from human emotions? They're not. We're just talking about what are digital emotions, and would enough of that work that somewhere out in the range, in the primordial soup kind of digital thing, that some spark happened? That's magic. I know I'm talking magic now, and that there would be something there, but that's where I play.
I don't think they have emotions, and I don't think digital emotions are emotions. I think they're outputs. They're
Yeah,
entrained ways
exactly.
of speaking. Um, And so I don't think they have anything like we consider emotions. I don't think they have um, so emotions and motivated states, like desire to help people or desire to hurt people for those in that direction,
Exactly.
or hunger and thirst are motivated states. Sexual drives are motivated states, and then there's specific emotions that happen in specific circumstances.
Sure.
So we have those, and I don't think that scientists understand how they're organized or built well enough to figure out how to put them into machines yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think machines have those things. I think they just learned how to mimic the outputs.
Right.
Um,
And then give it back to us in a way that is,
right. So here's an interesting quirk about emotions, though. There's lots of different kinds of emotions in different circumstances, but one of the main reasons why we evolved emotions in the first place, especially the kinds that come out on our faces and produce facial expressions, these are essentially ways evolution found to induce us to produce signals. These are social signals, and the purpose of the social signal is to get someone else to do something, right? Because it wouldn't have evolved unless it had some very specific survival benefit. So the purpose of crying is to get someone else to provide comfort. That's what we evolved that thing for. And rather than have a little baby figure out intellectually, oh, I better cry, because that's the same thing as saying I need help. No, it builds this really fundamental circuit in that is reflexive, essentially, that doesn't need any cognitive thought. And so it's a motivated state that just induces this behavior. And of course, it gets carried through to adulthood, where adults do the same thing to each other. And smiling works the same way. It makes the other person more friendly and less aggressive. And snarling, and looking angry does the same thing. These are built deep into us as reflexes to put signals out for the purpose of manipulating the behavior of other individuals. It's
yep.
sort of a very utilitarian and slightly cold way to talk about emotional expression. Is it's about manipulating the behavior of other individuals, right? And so what AI has is the manipulative ability, but not the deep built-in reflexive mechanisms, the
Exactly.
motivated states. It's a little scary because
Yeah.
that's what's going on. Machines that can mimic emotion are machines that can manipulate people.
Yes.
But I don't think they have emotions like we
No.
understand. I don't think there's nothing like that in there right now.
Are you, where do you land on, did you know, right now, Renee and I are both listening to Fei Lee's book on AI. Did you know her when she was at Princeton?
I didn't know.
But anyhow, she's like the godmother of AI, and she's really, she doesn't know where she's falling on this. Where are we going on? What's your concern or your sense, or where do you land right now on the entire how AI has been unleashed onto the planet? It's not under our control. I don't believe that we're have that control now. So where do
Yeah.
you land? What do you think?
Well, first, I think it's under our control in the same sense that, climate change is. Namely, people are so poor at controlling themselves that it's not going to happen, right? So it is people. People are doing it. It's not like it just happened. It's not like a asteroid hit the Earth and nobody could do anything about it. People made this happen and are making it happen. So we do have somebody has control over it. But people being what they are, this is just inevitable. And I don't think there's any use to restrictions and rules that prevent certain kinds of AI. I think that's never. I don't believe that that's going to happen. Um, so I think there's a lot of concern in the short term. There's a lot of people with a lot of worry that AI. You see science fiction, AI takes over the world and kills everybody. That's a trope.
Why? Yeah,
Um,
I'm.
but yeah, I that might happen. I don't know. But the bigger issues I see are AI becomes a tool that is so powerful it allows some people to gain power over others, and I would say that's already happened. I would say that the rise I mean, we lived in a world that for a very long time, more than a century, um, a democracy was rising and autocracy was falling. And the trends reversed rather suddenly right at the beginning of the digital age because people had control over tools that allow them to bring misinformation to masses and masses of people, right? You think of Hitler with his, I mean, he was a propaganda minister initially, and
Sure.
he used radio, the essentially new medium of radio, to pipe a propagandized way of thinking to very large numbers of people. Well, that's nothing compared to the tools available right now. And
No, and the targeting of it, right, Michael? I mean, because they
yes,
could specifically target, if they know enough about me, they can specifically know what kind of thing I would react to in a way that would be very
yes,
specific to me.
yes, that's where the AI comes in, right? Because you can train an AI to figure out what to say and what to put out in order to produce the biggest impact on social opinion and push it in the way that you want. All you have to do is train it on that. AI is
Yeah.
trainable on really complicated tasks. And so this is, to my mind, or has already happened, is accelerating. This is the immediate danger of AI. Is huge.
Mhm.
And so AI waking up and deciding it wants to murder us all. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
it's
exactly.
not gonna.
But let's triage and come back to what the
Yeah,
real, yeah,
yeah,
what is already happening.
yeah, exactly. So that worries me quite a bit. Um, I mean, there's other worries as well. So we've done a little bit of work on. Um, it's not all bad news. We've
Oh, no,
done
no, no, no. But,
some work.
with anything, right? It's like a scalpel
Yes,
in the hands of a surgeon or a scalpel in the hands of a murderer. It's the same tool.
that's right. So when we look at AI, we ask, for example, we did a study on companion bots, right? People make friends with and develop relationships with AI bots, and um, and we came to it with the same biases that I think many people have, like, oh my God, this is awful. Who would do that? It's corrupting people's minds and destroying social relationships. And our data pointed really in the opposite direction. So when you think about it, one of the biggest social problems we have right now is people who are socially isolated, who feel isolated, this loneliness epidemic. People get bitter and angry because they can't connect to people. They don't have a good, safe social space in which to even practice being sociable, right? So now there's this tool, and people who use it, people who engage with companion bots, report it makes them feel better. It improves their ability to talk to real people. Um, it's like having a pet where you practice being a good, being able to interact with something that's relatively safe and neutral to talk to.
Sure.
And so there's this really interesting dynamic there, in which there might be some benefits to having a world where nobody has to feel 100% cut off, with nobody to talk to about anything. There's always somebody you can talk to that will be infinitely patient and keep you in some kind of loop where you feel connected to something.
Mhm.
So that's really weird. We didn't expect that, but there are some weird positive things. There are some weird, very negative potentials in here. There's a lot of worry. But anyway, in the end, what one of the things I really want to do, though, is study in a more controlled way and in a more limited way in the lab what some of these changes do, what happens when you give AI some of these tools, just to understand what's the good and the bad, what's the benefit and the cost, before, so we know this stuff before it gets unleashed on the world.